My whole family laughed at me when I quit my steady office job to open a tiny cafe in our small town. They called it a waste of time and said I'd never make it. But everything changed the day my sister's boss walked in and asked, "You own this place." That moment flipped my life upside down and finally made my family see me for who I really am. Emily had always loved food, not just eating but the magic of creating it. Ever since she was a little girl, she spent hours in the kitchen watching her grandmother bake bread and brew coffee, fascinated by the way simple ingredients transformed into something comforting and special. But unlike her family, who chased flashy careers and social status, Emily's passion was quiet and humble. She dreamed of opening a small cafe where people could feel at home away from the chaos of the world. After college, Emily took a job at a corporate office, the kind her family expected her to have. She wore professional clothes, sat in meetings, and made spreadsheets, but inside, something felt missing. The work was stable, yes, but it lacked soul. Every evening, she'd come home drained, longing for the kitchen, for the smell of fresh coffee, for a place that felt truly hers. Her family lived in a small town where everyone knew each other. Emily's parents were proud of their older daughter Sarah, who seemed to have it all figured out. A prestigious job as an executive assistant at a big company designer clothes, and a social life filled with networking events. To them, Sarah's success was the standard, and Emily's quiet dreams barely registered. At family gatherings, the difference between the sisters was clear. While Sarah was praised and admired, Emily was often the subject of awkward jokes and skepticism. Her choice to leave the corporate world and open a cafe was met with rolling eyes and dismissive comments. "Why waste your time with coffee? Get a real job," her father once said bluntly. Her mother added, "You're going to struggle, Emily. You're being unrealistic." These words stung, but Emily kept her head down, determined to prove them wrong. The cafe wasn't fancy, just a small space in a quiet street with mismatched chairs and hand-painted signs. But to Emily, it was a dream come true. She poured her heart into every detail, from the carefully selected beans to the pastries baked fresh every morning. The customers were few at first, mostly neighbors and curious passers-by, but slowly word began to spread. People loved the cozy atmosphere and Emily's genuine warmth. The cafe became a little refuge for those seeking comfort, a place where smiles were free and the coffee was made with love. Emily worked long hours, often alone, handling everything from brewing coffee to balancing the books. She barely made enough to pay rent, but she never complained. Every satisfied customer was a small victory, proof that she was on the right path. Still, the doubts from her family weighed heavily on her heart. She sometimes wondered if they would ever understand why this meant so much to her. Sarah rarely visited the cafe, busy with her own life and career. When she did, her visits felt superficial, like checking a box rather than genuine interest. "It's cute," she'd say, "but don't expect it to be a real business." Those words felt like daggers, but Emily smiled politely and kept her distance. Despite the challenges, Emily found joy in simple moments: the first customer who smiled genuinely, the warm light filtering through the windows on a rainy day, the smell of freshly ground coffee beans. She knew that success wasn't about fancy titles or big paychecks. It was about creating something meaningful, something that made people feel at home. One evening, as Emily wiped down the counter after closing, she thought about her family's expectations and her own dreams. She realized that this cafe wasn't just a business, it was her way of proving that success could look different, that sometimes following your heart was the bravest thing you could do. Little did she know, the moment that would change everything was just around the corner, a visit from someone unexpected, someone who would see her cafe in a way her family never could. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Emily had barely been open for 2 months when her mother called her out of the blue, not to ask how things were going, not to say she was proud, but to warn her. "I heard from Aunt Carol that you're still doing that little coffee thing. Honey, we're just worried. It's not too late to go back to a real job." Emily bit her lip. That little coffee thing. As if all her early mornings, sleepless nights, and 7-day work weeks amounted to nothing more than a passing hobby. She tried to explain. "It's not just a cafe, Mom. I've got regulars. People love it. I'm finally doing something I care about." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a soft sigh. "You always were the dreamer." After that call, Emily began noticing the subtle but persistent ways her family dismissed her. At Sunday dinners, no one asked how the cafe was going, but they all made time to celebrate Sarah's latest work event or promotion. Her father would beam with pride as Sarah talked about her corporate boss, a woman who supposedly ran a Fortune 500 team with the precision of a military general. "Now that's a woman with ambition," he'd say, not even glancing in Emily's direction. One evening, Emily showed up to a family barbecue wearing her cafe apron she'd come straight from work, covered in flour and espresso stains. Sarah took one look and wrinkled her nose. "You really showed up like that." "I didn't have time to change," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "Well," Sarah said with a smirk, "I guess when you're your own boss, professionalism doesn't matter, huh?" The comment stung. Emily laughed it off, but her stomach twisted into knots. Her mother stood nearby, sipping wine, pretending not to hear, or worse, agreeing silently. But the real blow came a few weeks later at their cousin Ethan's engagement party. It was held at a fancy venue with a catered dinner and string lights twinkling overhead. Emily wore a simple navy dress and stayed quiet most of the evening, sipping water and avoiding the usual conversations about work, money, and success. She already knew she'd be invisible. And she was until Sarah, wineglass in hand, decided to perform her usual roast of Emily for everyone to hear. "So," Sarah began with a chuckle, "you guys know? Emily quit her job to open a cafe, right? I mean, how quaint is that?" Laughter rippled through the small circle of family and friends. "She makes her own pastries and everything, like a real-life Hallmark movie." Someone asked, "Wait, do you actually make money from it?" Before Emily could answer, Sarah chimed in. "She breaks even if she's lucky. It's more of a passion project, isn't it, Em?" Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to disappear or scream, but instead she just smiled weakly like she always did. She told herself it didn't matter, that their approval wasn't necessary. But the truth was, it hurt. It hurt in a deep, quiet way that settled into her chest like stone. As the party went on, she slipped out early and walked to her car in the cold night air. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, feeling like she had failed. Not because her cafe wasn't succeeding, but because her own family refused to see it. The next morning, Emily opened her cafe, like she always did, 6 a.m. sharp. The regulars trickled in, offering smiles and comfort in their own small ways. She took solace in their presence, in the warmth of the espresso machine, in the way the light danced on the hardwood floors. But the weight of that night at the engagement party didn't go away. A few days later, her mother stopped by the café unannounced. She didn't sit down or order anything, just stood by the counter and said Sarah's company is hiring again. I thought maybe you'd like to apply. You know, just to have something more stable. Emily stood frozen for a moment. Then calmly, she responded, Thanks, but I already have a job. One? I built myself. Her mother's smile faltered. Of course. I just thought you're still young. There's time to turn things around. Turn things around, as if she were failing. That night, Emily cried in the storage room of her cafe, surrounded by flour bags and coffee crates. She wasn't sure whether she was angry or heartbroken. Maybe both. She had done everything right, worked hard, followed her passion, treated people with kindness, and still, it wasn't enough for them. Still, she was the punchline in her own family. Something inside her shifted that night, the kind of shift that happens when you've been pushed too far. She wiped her tears, stood up straighter, and made herself a promise. She would stop waiting for their approval. She'd let her success speak for itself. And soon, very soon, it would. The days after her mother's visit were quiet, too quiet. Emily worked as she always had, but something in her had shifted. The doubt had stopped being a whisper in the back of her mind and had turned into a steady ache. She found herself second-guessing everything, the menu, the prices, the decor. Was she fooling herself? Was this really enough? Then, on a cold Thursday morning, something changed. It started with a catering order, a big one. 50 breakfast boxes, 20 assorted pastries, and 4 gallons of coffee, all to be delivered to a corporate office uptown by 8 a.m. Emily was used to small orders for local meetings, but this one, it was big money. Big exposure. She squinted at the email. Order placed by McIntyre and Rothman Corporate HQ. Her breath caught in her throat. That was Sarah's company. She reread the name, her fingers trembling slightly. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe the catering department placed the order and Sarah had nothing to do with it. Still, a strange mix of nerves and adrenaline surged through her. She got to work immediately, prepping, baking, packaging, labeling everything with care. The order needed to be perfect. At 7:30 a.m., sharp Emily loaded everything into her car and drove uptown. The traffic was light, the sunrise casting golden light across the windshield. Her heart pounded as she pulled into the parking lot of the glass and steel high-rise. She'd been here once years ago when Sarah had invited her to a company Christmas party. She remembered feeling completely out of place, then surrounded by polished, fast-talking professionals in heels and suits. But now she was back, not as a guest, but as a vendor, as a business owner. She carried the boxes up to the 10th floor, where the receptionist greeted her with a tight smile. "You're with Brew and Bloom," she asked, eyeing the logo on the pastry boxes. "Yes," Emily replied. "I am the owner." "Oh," the receptionist said, her tone shifting ever so slightly. "Right this way." Emily followed her down a gleaming hallway to the executive boardroom. The place was buzzing, assistants arranging notepads, executives chatting over phones. In the middle of the room stood a tall woman in a sharp navy suit, examining her phone with a look of focused precision. Ms. Calderon, the receptionist, called out, "The catering is here." The woman looked up, and Emily froze. It was her Sarah's boss, the famous Ms. Calderon. Emily had heard about her a dozen times over dinner conversations she wasn't included in. Sarah idolized her. Apparently, she was the kind of woman who broke glass ceilings in heels without ever breaking a sweat. Ms. Calderon walked over, inspecting the boxes with raised eyebrows. "This all from Brew and Bloom, yes," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman opened a pastry box, examined the labeling, and picked up a small handwritten tag on one of the croissants. "Orange zest and cardamom with a honey glaze." She took a bite, then another. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, this is good," she said. "Where are you located?" "Maine and Juniper," Emily said, still trying to process what was happening. "Is that your handwriting?" "Yes." "You do all the baking I do." Ms. Calderon nodded thoughtfully. "I've ordered from a lot of caterers. You're the first one who actually made me stop and pay attention to a croissant." She smiled, and it was a rare, approving smile. "Keep doing what you're doing." Emily blinked. "Thank you." Just as she turned to leave, a familiar voice rang out from the hallway. "Sorry I'm late." It was Sarah. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Emily standing in the boardroom, holding an empty pastry box. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Emily in her flour-dusted sweater, Sarah in her sleek black pencil skirt and expensive blouse. "Emily," Sarah said slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I'm the caterer," Emily said evenly. Ms. Calderon raised an eyebrow. "You two know each other?" "She's my sister," Sarah replied, her voice strained. "Really?" Ms. Calderon said. "You didn't tell me your sister ran Brew and Bloom." Sarah went pale. Ms. Calderon turned back to Emily. "I'd like to discuss a standing contract with you, regular orders, maybe a corporate breakfast partnership. Do you have time to talk sometime this week?" Emily's heart pounded. "Yes, I'd love that." "Great," Ms. Calderon said. "Send me your availability." As Emily faced that out of the building, she didn't smile. Not yet. She was still processing what had just happened. The validation, the look on Sarah's face, the shift in power. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, Brew and Bloom's catering orders exploded. It turned out Miss Calderon wasn't just a satisfied customer. She was also a bit of a tastemaker. Other corporate offices followed her lead. Emily started getting emails from businesses she'd never heard of, all saying the same thing. "We heard about you from McIntyre and Rothman." Emily had to hire 2 part-time employees just to keep up. Still, she didn't tell her family. Not yet. She wanted them to find out the way they always had, through whispers. It happened fittingly at another family dinner. Emily hadn't planned to attend, but her dad had insisted. "Sarah got another promotion," he said. "Big dinner at the house. You should come." She almost declined, but something told her to go. When she arrived, Sarah was already basking in compliments, talking about her new title and how she'd be managing larger clients directly. Ms. Calderon even asked me to handle the partnerships for the new vendor, she said proudly. "Some bakery we've started working with." Emily sat quietly sipping her wine. Their cousin David looked up. "Wait, is that Brew and Bloom?" Sarah hesitated. Yes. Why? David turned to Emily, eyes wide. That's your cafe, isn't it? The room went still. Emily put her glass down. Yes, that's mine. A beat of silence followed. Then Sarah laughed, but it sounded hollow. Well, technically, it's a client now. It's a good partnership, Emily. Her father said slowly, You didn't tell us that. No, she replied, meeting his gaze, because every time I've tried, you made me feel like I wasn't worth listening to. Her mother opened her mouth to speak, but Emily cut her off. You all laughed. You made jokes about me. You talked about my cafe like it was a hobby. And now it's supplying food to one of the top firms in the city, the same firm Sarah works for. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. Their uncle chuckled awkwardly. Well, I guess that's poetic. No, Emily said, rising to her feet. That's success. And I earned it without your help, your praise, or your approval. She didn't storm out. She didn't cry. She simply left calmly, with her head high. The next day, Sarah showed up at Brew and Bloom. Emily was surprised, but she let her in. Sarah looked around awkwardly. This place is different than I thought. Emily crossed her arms. You never cared to see it before? Sarah nodded. You're right, I didn't. There was a long silence before Sarah finally said, Ms. Calderon's been talking about franchising. She wants to meet with you about expansion. She asked if I'd coordinate the pitch. Emily stared at her. Why would I let you? Sarah looked down on Matikashangni. Because I'm sorry. I didn't believe in you. I thought I was better. But watching my boss go crazy over your pastries made me realize I've never built anything. I just followed the path people expected me to. You made your own. Emily didn't say anything at first. She just studied her sister's face and for the first time in years saw vulnerability. I'll think about it, Emily said at last. Sarah nodded quietly, grateful. As the door closed behind her, Emily looked around her cafe, the warm light, the hum of customers, the quiet clink of spoons and laughter. This place, once doubted and dismissed, was now a symbol of everything she stood for, and best of all, she had done it on her own. A week later, Emily found herself sitting at the sleek glass table in Ms. Calderon's corner office, sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Across from her sat not just Ms. Calderon, but two members of the firm's development team and, unsurprisingly, Sarah. They were pitching a full-fledged expansion, multiple Brew and Bloom locations, starting with 3 in the downtown area. Ms. Calderon believed in the brand in Emily's story, and most importantly, in her talent. This could be a 7-figure opportunity within the first 18 months, said one of the consultants, pointing at a chart. You'd retain full creative control. We just handle the infrastructure funding and logistics. Emily glanced at Sarah, who looked both hopeful and nervous. And what would Sarah's role be? Emily asked, her voice calm but pointed. Miss Calderon smiled slightly. She's offered to help manage corporate communications between you and our firm, if you're comfortable with that. Emily nodded slowly. I'll consider it. But if I'm doing this, it's on my terms. She was done being underestimated, done playing small. After the meeting, as they rode the elevator down together, Sarah turned to her and said, Thank you for not shutting me out. I haven't decided yet, Emily replied. This isn't about pity or forgiveness. It's about what's best for my business. Sarah nodded. I understand. 2 weeks later, the official partnership was signed. Brew and Bloom would open its first franchise location in Midtown, fully funded by the firm, with Emily as CEO of the brand. Her quiet cafe was about to become a household name. But the real revenge, it came quietly, organically, without her lifting a finger. News spread fast in their hometown. The girl who once wasted her degree to sell lattes was now signing a $1 million expansion deal. Local papers wrote features about her. Bloggers visited the cafe and posted glowing reviews. Her face appeared in a glossy Women in Business column that circulated far beyond her tiny corner of the world. And her parents. They didn't congratulate her right away. No, they waited until the neighbors started asking about her, until old friends of the family mentioned seeing Emily in a business magazine, until a family friend texted her mom, "Did you know your daughter is about to be the next Magnolia Bakery?" Then they came by the cafe, together. Emily looked up from behind the counter when she saw them walk and her dad in a pressed shirt, her mom carrying a box of homemade cookies, like it was some kind of peace offering. "We just wanted to say," her father began, "we're proud of you." Emily nodded. "Thank you." Her mother looked around. "This place is beautiful, Emily. Really, we didn't know. I tried to tell you," she replied gently, "but you weren't ready to hear it." Her mom lowered her eyes. "We were wrong. About everything." For a moment, Emily let the silence sit. Let them feel it. Then she said, "It's okay. You don't need to apologize. Just next time believe in someone before the world tells you it's safe to." Her dad swallowed hard. "Fair enough." As they left, Sarah entered holding a folder. She'd been coming to the cafe more often these days, quietly helping with the franchise rollout, offering ideas without being pushy. Emily had started to let her back in cautiously, but sincerely. "I saw them leave," Sarah said. "How'd it go?" Emily shrugged. "About as expected." "Hey, Sarah," said, opening the folder. "We got a mock-up of the first billboard ad." She slid it across the counter. There, in full color, was a photo of Emily behind the counter flower, on her hand smiling warmly beneath the cafe's signature sign, Brew and Bloom. "Built from scratch. They want to run it citywide," Sarah added. Emily stared at the photo for a long moment, something welling in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Peace. "I used to think I had to prove something to you," she said quietly. Sarah looked at her. "And now I realize I was always enough. You just weren't looking." Sarah nodded, blinking fast. "Well, I'm looking now." That weekend, Emily stood in front of the new Brew and Bloom location just a few days before opening. She wore the same apron she'd worn on her first day in the original cafe, the same pendant her grandmother had given her when she was little. A small crowd gathered for the soft launch. Reporters, foodies, local influencers. Even Ms. Calderon made an appearance, shaking hands and smiling like a proud mentor. But the moment that caught her off guard, an older woman in the crowd approached and said, "My daughter's studying pastry arts." She was afraid it wouldn't be a real career. Then she read about you. You gave her hope. Emily smiled. "Tell her," I said, "it's not just a real career. It's a real life." As the crowd clapped and the ribbon was cut, she looked up at the sign and felt something shift inside her. Not just pride, not just success, but liberation. She had turned judgment into admiration, mockery into opportunity, dismissal into respect, and all without ever raising her voice. That was the sweetest kind of revenge. 6 months later, Brew and Bloom had 4 thriving locations with 2 more under construction. Emily's days were a whirlwind of recipe testing, team mentoring, brand meetings, and the occasional quiet moment in her original cafe still her favorite place to be. She wasn't chasing anyone's approval anymore. She had built something real, something lasting, and most of all, something that came entirely from her. One evening, she was cleaning up after closing when Sarah walked in holding a small box. "I wanted to give you something," she said, placing it on the counter. Inside was a framed photo of the two of them as kids baking cookies with their grandmother. Next to it, Sarah had written in delicate handwriting to my big sister, the one who always had the recipe for greatness. Emily looked up, eyes glassy. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said quietly, "not because of the success, but because you never lost who you were." Emily smiled. "Thanks. Took me a while to realize that was my real strength." Just then, a young girl outside the cafe window peered in with wide eyes, tugging her mother's sleeve and pointing excitedly. Emily walked over and waved. The girl beamed. That tiny gesture meant more than any headline. Later that night, as she locked the doors, she looked back at the cafe. The soft glow of the pendant lights, the smell of cinnamon and espresso lingering in the air, it was hers, all of it. Her family no longer doubted her. Her community celebrated her. And most importantly, she had nothing left to prove. The girl they once called foolish had become a founder, a force and an inspiration. Not because she shouted louder, but because she never stopped believing quietly, steadily, until the world finally caught up. And in that moment, Emily knew she hadn't just built a cafe. She'd built her life back one cup at a time.